The flavor of your steak was decided months before it ever hit a pan. Not by the chef, not by the seasoning, by a field, a season, and the specific chemistry happening inside an animal you'll never meet. And the labels you're reading at the grocery store? They're only telling you about 1/10 of the real story. Welcome to the Meat Authority. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of the most misunderstood debates in the food world, grass-fed versus grain-fed beef. Because this isn't really a health debate, it's a flavor science conversation. And once you understand what's actually happening at the molecular level, you will never look at a steak the same way again. Let's start with fat, because fat is where this whole story lives. When most people hear grass-fed, they think leaner, greener, better for you. When they hear grain-fed, they think marbling, richness, indulgence. And those associations aren't wrong, but they're massively incomplete. The real difference isn't just how much fat is in the meat, it's what kind of fat and what that fat is made of. Grass-fed beef tends to be higher in omega-3 fatty acids and conjugated linoleic acid, a type of fat that researchers have studied for years. Grain-fed beef, particularly cattle finished on corn, is higher in omega-6 fatty acids. Now here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Those different fat profiles don't just affect your nutrition label, they directly affect how the meat smells and tastes when it hits heat. Different fats volatile at different rates. They produce different aroma compounds when they oxidize. In plain English, the type of fat in your steak is literally responsible for the flavor molecules your nose picks up when you take that first bite. Grass-fed beef is often described as having a more complex, sometimes gamey, slightly herbal or earthy taste. Grain-fed beef tends toward that buttery, sweet, rich flavor that most Americans grew up associating with a great steak. Neither is objectively better, but understanding why they taste different, that's where things get wild. And I promised you earlier that the reason behind this is stranger than most people expect. So here it is. What a cow eats doesn't just affect its fat. It affects the specific compounds that end up locked inside the muscle tissue itself. Grass contains natural pigments called carotenoids, the same family of compounds that make carrots orange and flamingos pink. Cattle that graze on grass absorb those carotenoids and they end up stored in the fat. That's why grass-fed beef fat tends to be yellowish, while grain-fed fat is bright white. Those carotenoids contribute to flavor. The specific grasses on a specific piece of land, ryegrass, clover, fescue, wild herbs, each bring their own chemical fingerprint, and that fingerprint ends up faintly but measurably in the beef. This brings us to the concept that I think is the most fascinating and under-talked idea in the entire beef world, terroir.
You've probably heard terroir in the context of wine. It's the idea that the soil, the climate, the geography of a place imprint themselves into the final product. Winemakers have obsessed over this for centuries. But here's the thing almost nobody in the beef industry talks about. Meat has terroir too. A cow raised on the coastal grasslands of New Zealand is eating different plants, drinking different water, and breathing different air than a cow raised on the high plains of Wyoming. Those differences, subtle but real, produce measurably different flavor compounds in the finished beef. Some elite ranchers and chefs have started talking about this seriously. There are farms in Europe, particularly in the United Kingdom and France, where specific pastures have been managed for generations specifically because of the flavor profile they produce. The Hereford cattle on the salt marshes of Normandy, they eat grasses that grow in sea-sprayed soil, and the beef reflects it. A faint minerality that you genuinely cannot replicate anywhere else. Now here's the pattern interrupt I want you to sit with for a second. Grain-fed beef, for all its richness and marbling, is actually more consistent and less interesting from a terroir standpoint. Because when you control the diet, corn, soy, barley, you get a predictable, standardized flavor every single time. That's not a criticism. Consistency is enormously valuable in a commercial food system. But it does mean you're trading regional character for uniformity. So now we've got fat chemistry and terroir on the table. But there's a third factor that the labels never mention, and this one is arguably the most important of all: finishing time. Most grass-fed cattle take significantly longer to reach market weight than grain-fed cattle. Grain is calorie-dense, grass is not. A grain-fed steer might reach its target weight in 14 to 16 months. A grass-fed steer grazing on pasture might take 24 to 30 months. That extra time does something profound. It allows more slow, patient development of intramuscular fat and more time for the muscle fibers to develop complexity. It also means the animal goes through more seasonal changes, eating different grasses as the seasons shift, which compounds the terroir effect we just talked about. Here's your butcher's secret for today. If you've ever bought grass-fed beef and found it disappointing, tough, lean, or lacking flavor, there's a very good chance it was harvested too young or came from poorly managed pasture. Great grass-fed beef requires exceptional land management, the right breeds for grass finishing, and patience that most producers can't afford. The difference between mediocre grass-fed and outstanding grass-fed is enormous, far bigger than the difference between decent grass-fed and decent grain-fed. The breed of cattle matters enormously here too.
Some breeds, Angus, Wagyu crosses, marble heavily even on grass, producing that richness people associate with grain-fed beef. Others, certain continental European breeds, stay lean regardless of diet. So when you're buying grass-fed beef and comparing it to grain-fed, you might also be comparing two completely different genetic animals, which makes the comparison even more complicated than the label suggests. So let's bring this all the way back to your kitchen. What does this mean for how you cook? Grass-fed beef, because it's leaner and has a different fat composition, cooks faster and can overcook more easily. That lower omega-6 fat content means less of the basting, self-lubricating effect you get with heavily marbled grain-fed beef. The practical advice: cook grass-fed beef to a lower internal temperature than you might otherwise. Pull a grass-fed ribeye at 125 degrees Fahrenheit for medium rare. Let it rest longer, at least 8 to 10 minutes, so the juices redistribute fully. And if you want to honor the flavor complexity that good grass-fed beef brings to the table, go easy on heavy marinades. A quality grass-fed steak with good sea salt, a hot cast iron, and a knob of butter is one of the most honest, satisfying meals you can make. Grain-fed beef, with its richer marbling, has more room for error and rewards high-heat cooking beautifully. The fat bastes the meat from the inside out as it renders. It's more forgiving, which is part of why it dominates steakhouse menus. Neither is the winner. The labels are not the whole story. The real story is fat chemistry, the land the animal walked on, the time it was given, and the specific biology of the breed, and none of that fits on a grocery store sticker. Next time you buy a steak, try this. Ask where it was raised. Ask what it was finished on. Ask how old the animal was at harvest. Those questions will tell you far more about what's going to end up on your plate than any certification label ever will. That's what we do here at the Meat Authority. We go deeper than the surface. If this changed how you think about beef, drop a comment below and tell me, are you a grass-fed loyalist, a grain-fed devotee, or have you stopped picking sides? I genuinely want to know. Hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And next time, we're going inside the world of dry aging, and what we're covering might completely change how long you're willing to wait for a perfect steak.